Okay, so I have a green tomato mincemeat recipe that was given to me by my aunt, my mother's sister, Aunt Pearl. And it's the same one that my mother made when I was growing up. And so I'm sure it goes back to their mother. So who knows how many generations back it goes. But this green tomato mincemeat uses some vinegar and some salt, which in the videos that I saw, they didn't have that. I start out with 2 cups of brown sugar and 1 cube of butter. And then I also do 2 to 3 apples. I need 3 cups of apples, and depending on the size of apples, it's going to determine how many I need. I'm first going to get those measured out. Now what I've done is I use just the green Granny Smith apple because it has a good tartness and it's firm, so it holds up well in cooking. And I peel them, core them, and slice and dice. Now, a lot of times, most of the time, I do several batches at once. I'll 2, 3, 4 times the recipe because I'll have a lot of green tomatoes that I need to make up into green tomato mincemeat. But I'm just going to do one recipe and follow it. I've modified this recipe a little bit. Originally, it calls for 3 cups of sugar, 1 brown and 2 white. But I have modified it a little bit so that there's not quite as much sugar. I just do 2 cups of brown sugar. And it doesn't make a noticeable difference, as far as I can tell, in the flavor. And other ways that I've modified the recipe is when I do the green tomatoes. If I have a whole lot of green tomatoes, and of course this was mostly before I started doing salsa verde with green tomatoes, so I was trying to use up the green tomatoes. And I would make a lot of mincemeat, and so I would do equal parts. The recipe calls for 3 cups of apples and 2 cups of green tomatoes. I've even in the past traded that and done 2 cups of apples and 3 cups of green tomatoes. But for the purposes of demonstration, I'm following it just exactly, except for I'm only using 2 cups of brown sugar instead of adding another cup of white. So we've got 1 cup of apples there. That's 2. And that's about 3/4. So let's see how much green tomatoes we have. For the green tomatoes, I'm going to be using my food processor because these are small green tomatoes. When I've had large green tomatoes, I'll just chop them up by hand when they're large. But when they're small, that's just a lot more chopping intricately. So I've chosen to use the food processor. I've done it another time and it worked out fine. What I do is I just take these small green tomatoes and I cut them in quarters just to give them a head start. And I fill it up about half full. And then I just chop it up. And it's a coarse chop, it doesn't have to be real fine. And that's just about all it needs. So I only need 2 cups of this, but I was a 1/4 cup shy of apples. So we'll see. If I have 2 cups and 1/4, I'll probably go ahead and just have that little bit extra just to have the full amount of fruit. Okay, that's 1, 2, that looks like 1/4. That should be just right. Now I also need 2 cups of raisins. 1, 2. The next thing I need is to grate the rind of an orange. Try not to get the white. That can give it a bitter flavor, so you don't want to get the white in there. Just the outer zest. Now, after grating the zest off of the orange, then we need to chop up the pulp and add it as well. I just kind of break it up a little bit. It'll break up a lot more as it cooks because it's going to cook for quite a while. Now we're also going to add a 1/4 cup of just white vinegar. Now it's my guess that the vinegar is a way of having some replacement of maybe the meat product. Originally, mincemeat was made from meat, suet, and that's why we put the butter in there to replace the oils from that. And I think the vinegar is probably for the same reason. Now we also need some salt. It calls for 1 teaspoon of salt. And it calls for 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And 1 teaspoon allspice. And 1 teaspoon of cloves. Now we're going to take all of these ingredients, and heat them up. And the juices from the fruits, as well as the melted butter, you don't have to add any other liquid in there. And I put it on a medium high and just stir it occasionally so that things don't get scorched on the bottom. It's smelling wonderful already. While that's heating up, I'm going to clean up. We're getting more and more juices as it's warming up. The brown sugar is melting, and so is the butter. The juices are coming out of the fruits. The whole idea is just to cook this down until it gets a nice thick consistency, like a pie filling. Here it is. It's starting to get to a boil, and all of the butter has melted, as well as the sugar. As you can see, I'm using an enamel-coated cast iron pot. I prefer to use this sort of thing when I'm making tomato sauces and jams and things, because it's less likely to scorch and it heats up really well. And you can see it's well used. I've got chips on the handles, and the white coating is very discolored. Once it gets up to a nice rolling boil, I will turn it down and just let it simmer for a couple hours. It really fills the house with an amazing smell with the allspice and cloves and cinnamon and the orange rind and apples. It's just amazing. Okay, we're getting a good boil, so I'm going to turn it down to simmer and let it cook for a couple hours. So this is the consistency you want it to look like. There's very little liquid left, and it's all pretty much incorporated together. And as it cools, it'll be less visible as well. It was for about between 2 and 3 hours, and it's maybe 2.5 total. It really is delicious. This is the one jar I have left from last year. And I'm going to make a breakfast bar. Now the recipe for this breakfast bar is really easy. All we do is make an oatmeal brown sugar crumb. I use whole wheat flour, and we just press it onto the bottom of the pan. It uses melted butter. And so you don't even have to cut the butter into the dry ingredients. There, it's just pressed nice and firm. And it's very easy to just add whatever filling you like. I always use a fruit filling. And like I said, I've used berry, I've used apple pie filling, I've used cherry, whatever I had on hand. I use this for a replacement of granola bars, for when I'm traveling, for a quick, easy breakfast. I like this jar. I found it at a thrift store. It uses the regular lid. I was needing jars. I found that last year. I prefer to try to get used jars if I can, because I usually need so many, and I can't afford that many new. So I do what I can to get used ones at yard sales, estate sales, letting my friends know I'm looking for jars. I always check thrift stores first before I go to get something new. And it's that simple. You just spread it out, and then you just scatter the crumbs on top. After making the crust, I put aside about 1.5 cups to just spread on top. The oven is already preheated to 350, and it's going to bake for 25 minutes. I always set the timer because I forget. It's too easy for me to forget that I have something in the oven or cooking. Okay. Well, through the magic of video, we'll see what that looks like in just a moment. By the magic of video, here is the completed breakfast bar made with the mincemeat for a filling. I'm going to cut a piece out so you can see how it looks. It's real pretty in layers. It's rather warm. When it cools down, it'll hold together really well. Isn't that beautiful? It really tastes good.